I'm Bob Mader. I'm chair of the National Association of Flight Instructors. It's really good to see all of you. How great is it to be at Oshkosh in person? I'm going to introduce a good friend. Brian and I have known each other, oh my word, since we met. He's just like his old man. I think we've known each other since, what, 2000? When we were in this mid-90s. Yeah, before I was a CFI. I was hanging at the same FBO you were teaching at. And we're instructors together, and I've watched his career. And I have to say, I said it this morning at our breakfast, it's really neat. Of course, Barry Schiff is his dad. Not taking Brian's thunder away, but this is important. Ryan's an experienced airline captain and an instructor, and he's a Part 61 guy and all that. But the neatest thing in the world is Brian's son, Jonathan, got his private last week. So 3 generations. I'll go on a limb here and hope I don't offend anybody, but when you're flying somewhere in the LA basin, the sky is full of Schiff. Anyway, on that note, and that's on the recording too. Okay, anyway, Brian.
Schiff is a good thing.
There you go. Brian, my good friend Brian, he's also on our board, one of the nicest guys in the world and a great speaker. He's going to talk to you about, what the heck are you going to talk about again? The possible turn, right?
Basket weaving while you're flying the airplane.
Okay, outstanding. Okay. All right. Yeah. Seriously, Brian Schiff's going to talk about the possible turn.
No, that's Saturday. We're going to talk about being pilot in command.
Being pilot, I didn't want.
That's all right.
All right.
We got it. Thanks, Bob.
There we go. You've got the controls. I'm getting the heck out of your way.
All right. You have the controls. I have the controls?
You have the controls.
I have the controls. Well, welcome, everybody. It's really cool to do this back in person. I've been doing nothing but online webinars, seminars, and seeing nobody but my webcam and the PowerPoint on my screen, wondering if anybody's there watching. And I can't tell if you're falling asleep. And I am, however, wearing, like boxer shorts and just a nice shooting shirt and tie. But so now I got to put on real pants and do this in person, which is a drawback. But I really love interacting with people, and it makes it a lot more fun. And if you fall asleep, I really love interacting with you. We'll have some fun with that. But no, that tells me that I need to change the subject or liven it up or something like that. Bless you very much. Say happy birthday to my good friend Jim. He's turning 29 today. In any event, how many PICs do we have in here? Anybody who's ever acted or logged pilot in command? I want to see it. Very good, very good. Any student pilots? Well, all of us, right? Yeah, I'm always learning. Good pilot's always learning, right? No, that's awesome. So how many commercial pilots? Professional pilots? Awesome. So you guys will probably get a lot more on that. Any ATPs? So there's ATPs? Yeah. How about any FAA in here? Good. So we can say what we want. Any controllers in here? Because we're going to talk about ATC a little bit too, and I always like their input. So we'll do that too. And I might ask some questions, get you involved in this too. This is going to be a very informal and a fun conversation that I want to try to have with you guys. So as I got my CFI, or my commercial license, really my commercial certificate, I thought, okay, I'm a commercial pilot now. I know everything. I must, or I couldn't be a commercial pilot. And I thought I really knew like 90% of what there was to know. And then the more I evolved into my aviation career, I realized how little I actually knew. And so that's why this quote is something I've always been saying, is that I wish I knew half as much as I thought I knew back then. And so this is also known as the Dunning-Kruger Effect. Has anybody heard of that? Who has? Really? So we're getting the word out on that. So that's really what I'm talking about, is novices really don't know how much in a field, don't know how much they don't know. And therefore they think they know so much. So a big part of being a good pilot in command is being educated on your subject. Well, here's a short video about the Dunning-Kruger effect for those of you who are unfamiliar. And I'm going to make sure the volume is good here.
In 1995, a man...
Nope.
In 1995, a man named MacArthur Wheeler robbed a bank in Pittsburgh. He was caught because his only disguise was lemon juice. he covered his face with it. He knew that lemon juice could be used as an invisible ink when writing on paper revealed by heating. And he knew so little about why that worked, and he knew so little about how cameras worked, that he assumed with extreme confidence that lemon juice could make him invisible too. Seriously. Wheeler is an extreme example and was the inspiration for the Dunning-Kruger Effect. Novices, people unskilled in particular disciplines, will often overestimate their knowledge and abilities in said disciplines because they don't even know how little they know, how much more there is to learn. On the flip side, experts in particular fields will often underestimate their knowledge, have less confidence in their abilities, or think that everyone else has the same level of knowledge that they do. What drives the Dunning-Kruger effect is the fact that often, the more you learn about something, the more you realize just how rich and complex and overwhelming and full of as of yet unanswered questions it really is.
And so what does that have to do with being pilot in command? Well, I think it has a lot to do. Your knowledge is power. The more you know, the better pilot in command you can be. And when I say pilot in command, we're talking about in charge of the airplane, the one who is responsible for being pilot in command. What is pilot in command? We're going to get into that a little bit more. Any brand new private pilots? Yeah, Bob. Remember right after you got your pilot certificate, you thought you were the king. You thought you knew it all, and you realize as you go on, oh my gosh, there's more and more. And I'm preaching to the choir because you guys are here. So when I say you need a continuing education, need to keep learning more, it's the people who aren't here that need to hear that, not you guys. You guys are here, which is awesome. But there's always more to learn. So no talk about being pilot in command is complete without talking about the lift equation first. I mean, you really need to know, no, we're not talking about the lift equation. We're not going to get into anything technical. We're not going to talk about ACS. We're not going to talk about things that need to be memorized. This is the mushy stuff, the stuff that really why most aircraft accidents happen. Because the decisions that are made, because of the soft stuff in the brain, because we did something we shouldn't have done, or we weren't a good pilot in command. Not because the wing failed, or because something mechanical happened. Those things do happen, but they're very rare. Most of the accidents are happening because the pilot was not a good pilot in command. So, you are taught all kinds of things as you learn to fly and get your license. You get that baseline foundation of the things that you need to know about the airplane, about the lift equation, how a wing produces lift, the regulations, how to operate in the National Airspace System and navigate, all these things that you have to learn. But what you're not taught, and sometimes you are, I shouldn't say you're not taught, but what is not spent or focused on is how to be a great pilot in command. That's what we're going to talk about here tonight. When I first had, tonight? That's how long my day has been. I feel like it's already bedtime. When I first had my airline interview in 1989 to become a pilot for TWA, there was a poster on the wall. And they asked me, they say, look at this poster, and here it is. I don't know if you can read it, but it says the most important wings on a plane are on the pilot. And that's referring to, obviously, the uniform wings that we wear. And so they asked me in my interview, what does this mean to you? Look at this poster. Tell me what this means to you. And I think I don't need to go into great detail. What that means is that the pilot is a very important aspect of the whole safety operation of the airplane, which really got that kind of thinking into the appropriate arena to where what you need to be thinking about. Why are those the most important wings on the airplane? Food for thought, but I think we all know. So getting down to the definition of pilot in command, if we look at the regs, and don't worry, this is not going to be a deep dive into regs. I know as soon as someone sees that, they probably go, oh God, here we go. But really, what does the FAA expect of us as pilot in command? I'm going to get past this. I do it early on so that by the time you're tired and fatigued and bored and thinking you're about to walk out, that you won't fall asleep during regs. But the responsibility and authority. We all know what 91.3 says you're directly responsible for, and the final authority as to the operation of the airplane. What does that mean? Think about that. Those are powerful words. And a lot of the accidents that I've seen and studied, and there have been numerous. I do a lot of accident reconstruction, analyzation, and consulting on the side, and I learn a lot about accidents. One of the common denominators is actually rushing to comply. I'm going to talk about that a little bit too, but it's usually a flaw with what the pilot in command has done and not exercising the authority that they actually have. And it also gives the permission for the pilot to deviate from any rule in the interest of meeting the requirements of that emergency or whatever he's dealing with. A pilot, you can break any rule of the regulations. That's a great safety net. That, okay, I got a problem. I can stop worrying about regs and do what I have to do at that time. Question, do you have to declare an emergency to exercise that right as pilot in command? Who says yes? Good. You don't have to declare an emergency. You just have to be experiencing one. So the aim in regs, we'll talk about the aim, and the regs also say, under the definition of pilot in command, it's the person who has the final authority is the safety of the flight. That's the first definition. Secondly, has been designated as pilot in command before the flight. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a second. But also holds the appropriate category, class, and all that. So you got to be legal to fly that airplane and be pilot in command of it. But the one I'd like to look at is this has been designated as a pilot in command before or during the flight. That's an interesting one. So who's a pilot? Certificated pilot. Okay. Who flies a 172? Okay, what's your name? No, back here. Yeah, what's your name? Cynthia? And what's your name? Keith. Okay, you two are going to go flying together in the 172. Just going to go have lunch. Your friends, you're going to go flying. Okay, who's going to fly? Well, you decide before you go, and that's what this is about. This is designating who's going to be pilot in command. How many hours do you have, Keith? 2,000? That's good. 1 ton of the hours. How many hours do you have? 1,200? So is it fair to say that the one with more hours is pilot in command? He owns the plane. I've been asked this before. I'll fly with my dad, and they say, well, who's pilot in command when you two fly together? I look at him, he looks at me, and I say, well, I'm not going to answer that until the flight's over. I'll tell you when the flight's over who was pilot in command. But let's say anybody in here with, like, say 200 hours or less? Any load time people? What's your name? I'm sorry? Rick. So me and Rick are going to go flying. Rick has 200 hours, or less than 200 hours. I just cracked, and I'm not going to tell you because it sounds a little self-serving, but I have a lot more than that. So let's say he and I are going to go flying. We designate, we're just going to go for lunch, and Rick's going to be the pilot in command. He's going to sit in the left seat, and I'm just going to go along for the ride. I'm not teaching. It's just a day off. And let's say we land and we get a little bit of we bend some metal on landing. Insurance company comes out, and I think I was holding this down. Don't hold the button down when you're trying to present. What's happening here? This is why I fly an Airbus. It's automated. So who's pilot in command? Who will the insurance company think is pilot in command if we bend some metal on landing? Are they going to look at the 200-hour guy or the guy with 10 times that? That can be an issue as well. So the point here is, it's not a bad idea to designate this on paper beforehand and leave it with somebody. That's what the airlines do. That's what Part 135 charters do. They just say, okay, here's who the pilot in command is going to be. It sounds really overkill. And who's going to do that? You and I are going to lunch, and we're going to say, if I, as the 20,000-hour pilot, are going to go out with a 200-hour pilot to fly, but I want to have nothing to do with it. I could be on some medication. I'm not even current. The insurance company's going to look at me. Just write it down, leave it with somebody. Hey, he was acting as pilot in command. We're designating him. That's a regulation. Enough on that. Just be real attentive to who is acting as pilot in command when you get more than one cook in the kitchen. It could get interesting afterwards. So, the slides that you just saw, I gave away the ending, but this is a time that I was flying. I was pilot in command. This was my first job as a pilot being paid for my pilot services. And I was flying a high-profile higher up in the company, and it was an interesting flight. I had to make a decision that I thought would cost me my job. So this is all about saving my job, and I was at a fork in the road here. And sometimes you have to make a decision that might cost you your job, but save your life. So you have to decide what's worth more. In the moment, it can be a very tough choice to make because you feel pressure. This is, and we're going to talk a little bit more about external pressures, but these external pressures really can have an effect on influencing you to make the wrong decision. We need to be very careful about that. So there I was. Okay, I'm a captain of a Piper Arrow, single pilot operation, and it was departing Carmel Valley. I'm flying the boss man, so we're leaving an airport in a box canyon in a valley on a very hot day. It's a short runway. It's actually an unimproved runway. Anybody been to Carmel Valley, California? One? You been there? You remember what that runway's like? Yeah, rolls his eyes. Yeah, so it's not much of a runway, and there's hills all around, and it was an unusually hot day. So whenever something unusually happens, you want to think what kind of flags are popping up. What flags pop up in your mind on this particular day? And they had a lot of cargo, so heavy, hot. What's the first thought? Hey, I'm a poet, and I wasn't even aware of it. It's heavy and hot. What's the first thought? Somebody say it. I know I feel heavy and you guys are hot right now, so this is all playing into it. Did somebody say it? I haven't heard it yet. There it is, density, altitude. Yeah, so that's what we want to think about, and I thought about it. They showed up with all these boxes of stuff they wanted to carry from Carmel Valley back to the main office in San Jose. And they wanted to bring them. There was two of them, me. So Piper Arrow is a 4-seat airplane, very capable, but I'm looking at all the factors here, and I'm thinking, okay, I want to do a weight and balance, and I want to look at my performance charts. I was 21 years old at the time, very influential, trying to build time. I shouldn't, did I say influential? Very easily influenced, okay? And susceptible to pressure because I wanted to build time. I'm looking for the next job. This job I had was a great job. So I didn't want to upset anybody, but then again, I've also was trained, I believe, the right way. So what do? I do look at the performance charts, and I remember this boss man looking over my shoulder as I was sweating, looking at the spaghetti charts that are the takeoff charts for the Piper Arrow, and looking up to see, can we do this or not? And before I finish the story, I would like you to know a little bit more about my passenger and how he is. And if you've seen this movie, you know, but I'll tell you that Ashton Kutcher played him beautifully.
Everything is a pressing issue. If we want to make the vision for Lisa a reality, we got to put in the hours and make something great.
Yeah, but we have a hard date on this software, and I'm sorry, but adding pretty fonts is not going to change that. I mean, Bill?
If you don't share our enthusiasm and care for the vision of this company...
No. I'm not understanding.
Get out.
What?
Get your shit and get out.
What?
You're done.
What are you gonna fire me?
No! I already fired you! Why are you still here?
Steve, he was our best programmer in the division.
He's the best programmer that doesn't care about our vision.
So that was my boss. I had to say no. I didn't share the vision about trying to get this Piper Arrow off of this unimproved strip on a hot day in a box canyon with all this weight. And I didn't feel comfortable about this. I looked it up, and he was looking over my shoulder as if he knew what I was looking at. Or going to change my mind. He said, we just did this last month. Probably a lot cooler last month. The other pilot maybe was more skilled than me, or suicidal, or whatever the reason. He did it, I didn't. That doesn't mean that I should do it because someone else did it, first of all. Second of all, there was a lot of pressure, and he was yelling at me, not unlike what you just saw. And the other passenger was a gentleman named Mike Markula. He gave Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak the money they needed to get their little idea going. Well, luckily, he was a more reasonable man, and he pulled Steve Jobs off of me and said, let him do what he's doing. Let him figure this out. He's the pilot. So I figured it out, and I said, I don't like this. We're not doing it. I have an idea. So here's the, if you watched The Kings yesterday, they had some great advice, John and Martha, about leaving yourself an out. So my idea was, don't trip, that I would fly the airplane to Monterey from Carmel Valley, and they would drive there, and I would pick them up. It's a long runway, we got a cool ocean breeze, no obstacles, and I felt a lot better about that. It wasn't that we were over gross, it was that we were too heavy for that airport under those conditions. He didn't like that. He was actually quite torqued. But I said, that's the only way I'll do it. So I kind of had him under my gun, and he had to agree to do it, and Mike Markkula talked him into it. Reason prevailed, and I figured this is probably my last flight for that company, but that's okay. I'm okay with that. The way I was taught to fly, I'm like, I don't want to work for a company who's going to, ask me to do these kind of things anyway. And you should be the same way. So that's what we did. I took off. I flew to Monterey. It took me 5 minutes. It took them about 15, 20 minutes to drive there. And when we got there, not a word was spoken. We loaded up the airplane, taxied out to the runway, took off. Now I'm cruising down the runway. I might have just kept cruising down the runway and not rotated for a while. Cruising down the runway, rotate at the very end and climb very shallow. I might have done that to make a point. Their minds, just picture this takeoff in Carmel Valley and see how that would have played out. Again, flight to San Jose, not a word was spoken. And we get there, they unload. He was very upset, clearly. Thankfully, there was a third party there calming Mr. Jobs down. And when I was putting the airplane to bed, one of the line service guys came up and said, Brian, Mike wants to talk to you at his office. I'm like, okay, here we go. This is it. And like a man 20 minutes late to dinner when wife is cooking, I'm going through all the arguments in my head. Okay, I got everything. I'm organizing my thoughts. This is what I'm going to say. I don't care about this. I'm going to quit. If you don't fire me, I'm going to quit. And I got all this in my head. I walk into Mike Markkula's office. He says, Brian, come on in, have a seat. Close the door, have a seat. It was just like not unlike something you'd see in a movie. And he's on the phone because he's better than me. He's very important. So I sit down and wait while he's on the phone yelling at somebody else for something. And I'm just going through all these arguments in my head. He hangs up the phone and he says, Brian, I'm ready. Okay, I got loaded in the chamber all my arguments for why we did this. And he says, Brian, what are we paying you? I'm like, what? Took me off guard, so I told him, and he says, all right, well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to double your pay because anybody who would stand up to Steve Jobs in the interest of safety like that, the way you did, is exactly who we want. That could have gone another way. I mean, that really did have an influence on, I think, my decision-making the rest of my career. So as a boss, I applaud him for that. Yes. Back in 1989, it was $100 a day, and as a contract pilot for them in the Piper Arrow, so he doubled it to $200 a day. So as a 21-year-old young college student punk flying for a living, it was a lot better than the $8 an hour flight instructing I was making. The question was, what was your salary? Doubled. So that was very good, and if he'd have fired me for that, the next time I was faced with such a decision might not have gone the same way. And that's why I applaud him for that. And I'm thankful for him for doing that, because I have realized and learned making the right decision will pay off. If it doesn't, then you're in the wrong place. So my advice is don't ever work for somebody you're afraid to get fired from. So the decision-making process, avoid get-there-itis. There's never a reason that's that important to kill yourself, okay? And if you're going to break any rules, and I briefed this to my first officers at the airline, there are 3 things that I want you to stick to. And if you have to break one of them, start at the bottom, number 3, then number 2, then number 1. The first is be safe. I don't care what you do as a first officer, just fly the airplane as long as it's safe. The second is as long as you're legal. And the third is comfortable for the passengers. So those 3 things that if you adhere to, you're going to be a safe pilot. And if you have to break off of one of those, break off number 3, then break off number 2, and of course, lastly, safety would be the last thing you'd want to ever give up. And so the external pressures came into play not too long ago with someone very near and dear to our hearts, especially in Los Angeles. And so learning to resist these external pressures, and as you know, it's the E in PAVE, and I'm not going to get into acronyms. I loathe acronyms because I can't spell, and I will spell it wrong. So the PAVE checklist, however, does talk about external pressures, and it is something that's very important for us to manage, is these external pressures. One thing that will really help, and this is kind of an airline technique thing, or a professional pilot technique, I shouldn't just say airlines. Those of you who are professional pilots will know what I'm talking about when I say stay inside the envelope. Okay, we have this envelope of all kinds of things that tell us, that give us limits. Okay, the AIM, the FARs, the aircraft manufacturer handbook, a rental agreement, insurance requirements, they set limits for us, right? Every accident I've seen, somebody crosses one of these boundaries. Either I can land when it's 2 3/4 miles, I got this, you know, and you're exceeding or breaking one of these limits. And if you just stay, this is going to get loud. If you stay within these boundaries and follow the limits and adhere to the limits that you're given, I think you've reduced 90, maybe more % chance of getting in an accident. You've reduced those odds. Do you have to go right up to those limits? Right up to the edge of that? No. No, I wouldn't. Those are bare minimum. This is basically the regs, the policies, that's saying this is the worst you can be, the worst you can do. I don't even like to push up to that, so I'll back it off. If 3 miles is the FAR, maybe I'll say 5 miles when I fly, until I get more comfortable with the area. If I'm really familiar with the area, I'll lower it down to 4. Whatever that is, you can have your own personal limitations, and we've all heard of, you know, setting your personal minimums. And I think Jolie Lucas is talking about that at AOPA today. So just don't exceed the rules. If you don't ever break the rules, they're all there, and most of them were written, you know, in blood, in some kind of accident that happened to make that rule there. And if we just follow that, we get rid of that reason for the accident. So a good pilot in command, what? What makes a good pilot in command? Any throw out there something to me. A characteristic, huh? Assertiveness when necessary. Yeah, that's a good one. Anything else? Like if you had to come up with a description of what would make a good pilot in command, what would it be? A good, to be safe, what's that? Decisive? Yeah. Good example of decisiveness is Sully. Okay, he had a very short time to make a very big decision, put it in the river, which he stuck to that decision. And people gave him options and said, yeah, we got Teterboro right over here. No, we're going to the river. He didn't get succumb to those others, so being decisive and sticking to it. Absolutely, yeah. Safety. Safety, having a high regard for safety. Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Not too much pride.
Oh my gosh, pride goeth before what? Yeah, he said not too much pride. You cannot have pride. Yeah, and especially, I remember going on a first date one time where I was taking a gal over to Monterey or Catalina or something like that, and I had to pull the plug on that because of the weather, the fog, whatever. You have to be, you can't be so proud that that you're going to do anything anyway. There was someone over here. Yeah. Confidence, absolutely. Confidence, and hopefully confidence that's not misdirected. Yeah. Knowledgeable. So that was, knows the FARs, know your limits, know the regulations, what's expected of you, knows the aim, so there's the knowledge. And procedures, airplane systems, normal and emergency, the limitations, and maybe some memory items. Some things that you may not have time to grab the book out for. And what's the last time you ever looked at the engine fire checklist on your aircraft? Your in-flight engine fire. Yeah.
Willingness of the ask for help.
That's huge. That was awesome. He said the willingness to ask for help. And that kind of goes along with the pride. Don't be too proud to ask for help. There's a lot of help out there. ATC or get on 121.5. I think recently we heard a story of an airliner helping a guy talk a pilot down to a safe landing when he lost his engine. Well, at the airlines, we're always monitoring 121.5, and if you ever look at Flight Radar 24, how many airplanes you see up at a time, there's a constant series of radio stations with experienced pilots on the other end for you to talk to. Absolutely, ask for help. Yep. So also, avoiding quandaries. Keeping yourself out of this situation where you're going to get into some kind of quandary that requires you to make a bad or worse decision. And that's a quandary I have to read this, I don't memorize it. A state of perplexity or uncertainty over what to do in a difficult situation. It should be obvious. When you have a partial power loss, that's kind of a quandary. Unless you've established in your head ahead of time, I'm going to make the nearest landing at the nearest possible field or strip anywhere. If you have that in your head ahead of time, then there's no perplexity, there's no quandary there. You have that, like your oil pressure down, oil temperature up, nearest airport 50 miles, perfect field right below you. What do? And I know all you were thinking, oh, God, land in the field. That's what you say here in this tent. But I've been in that situation, and it's very easy to convince yourself, well, it's running now. I'd really rather be at the airport. Continue with that whole list of reasons why you want to get to your destination, including we're pilots and we're mission hackers. As soon as that engine oil temp went up and the pressure went down, your mission is done. Your mission just changed. You want to get it on the ground on a field with partial power, as opposed to now you're between that field and an airport. You can't make either one, and the engine seizes. Obviously very bad. So it's about having these decisions in your head ahead of time, leaving yourself an out. Let's say you're between those two fields, the field and the airport, and you thought that this cross country would be good to do at 3,500 feet when 55 or 75 was perfectly available and there for you. Why wouldn't you go to 35 or 55? It's a state of mind. I see even instructors who will fly. Recently, I heard of this, a cross-country flight across the Everglades in Florida at 2,500 feet across Florida. It was a 200-mile cross-country. And I thought, why would you do that? It was a clear day. There's no weather, no airspace to speak of. I know what's in that Everglades. They have big teeth. So why not fly higher so you can glide to both sides? So leave yourself an out. When I fly to Catalina across the 26-mile channel, I won't leave Torrance, I won't leave the landfall to the island until I'm high enough to glide to either runway. Manage your resources, and this goes along with not being afraid to ask for help. Flight service station, weather sources that you have. We have so many resources now electronically through internet or a satellite or whatever. And other passengers or pilots. Your passengers are a resource. Watch for traffic. If you see an airplane, tell me. Utilize all your resources. I verbalize my intentions too, because it also gets it clear in my head what I'm doing. Even taxiing, tell my first officers, hey, I verbalize what I'm doing, so if at any time you don't know what I'm doing, I don't either. Okay, so I'll tell you, I'm holding short of this taxiway. Okay, Delta is coming up next. I'm going to make a left turn on taxiway Delta, so that he knows he can help back me up on that. You can have a passenger too. You can say, hey, if you see any double yellow lines and I'm about to cross them, tap me on the shoulder. I mean, there's a number of ways you can do that. But I verbalize what I'm doing. It helps myself as well. So obviously, and this is where I'm preaching to the choir, that a good pilot in command continuously educates themselves and learns, has a strive for knowledge. You guys are here, so I'm preaching to the choir. It's the people that just don't feel the need to attend these seminars or to study more or watch webinars or take classes. I think that's a problem. So you guys are doing it. So try to encourage other pilots you know to do the same. A good pilot in command is always ready to stop what he's doing, to reject it, to change plans. Anything can happen. The weather can change. Something can change to make this plan not so good. and that you have to decide, okay, this isn't going to be a good idea. You have to be willing to change plans, and if you commit that to yourself, that you're going to change plans if needed, then you're going to be less likely to talk yourself out of that if a scenario arises where you've got to do something
Food
different.
out the wazoo!
Well, you know, whatever kind of food comes out of a wazoo, I really don't think we're interested in eating.
I don't know. The guy's making a lot of sense to me. I think we should listen.
Well, yeah, I'm okay with wazoo food there.
No, you're not. The tail is tingling.
Hold on. The what is what?
When something doesn't feel right, my tail tingles. And let me tell you something. Everything you've said so far is driving my tail crazy.
Over the hedge. Why did I play that little snippet? What's the takeaway there? What's that? Yeah, follow your gut. The hair on the back of your neck. I got a big gut. It's the GIC. Okay, this is the gut and command right here. If I see something or a scenario arises that I don't like, something's just a little bit too makes my tail tingle, like what happened there. Just it doesn't see. You know when it happens. You've all experienced it before. And I know who hasn't gone anyways. Anybody had a scenario where you thought, I'm not sure about this, but you went anyway? Anyone? Yeah? What'd you do? Hang on.
No, I didn't have anything. I said never. I was
Oh, you've never have. Anybody have one? I want to hear it. I got another mic here. I'll share it. Don't think I won't. Tell us, what happened?
Well, unfortunately, I went into a backcountry strip on a hot day and had a pretty bad landing, but couldn't take off.
Okay, so did you do something when you thought you shouldn't have?
I shouldn't have landed.
You shouldn't have got in there because you couldn't get out. But did you have a funny feeling beforehand, like maybe this isn't a good idea?
Yes.
Okay, so listen to that. That's what we're talking about. Anyone else have a story where you've done something? Come on. Yeah, I see you're getting pointed to here. What did you do that your tail was tingling and you did it anyway?
We don't have all day to get into that, but...
You keep it short.
I was trying to get to St. Croix in a Baron, had stopped in Turks and Caicos. Miami Center wasn't accepting me, telling me that I was not filed with the tower. Tower said, in fact, you were. So meanwhile, I'm over the water. And then finally they got their act together, and Miami Center actually apologized to me and said, I'm sorry, it's our fault. You know, continue on. And I shouldn't have.
I'm guessing this is a fuel thing?
Of course, yeah. Okay. So when we landed, you know, we topped it off for some other flights, and it looked like there were probably about 3 gallons left.
Oh, ouch.
Yeah.
So you had a little tingling feeling about continuing after having circled for that long.
Yes, that was 19 years ago.
19.
And that lesson is still putting the hair on my neck up.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you listened to that. So when your gut or your tail tingles and tells you something is not right, it's usually right. So that's what I'm talking about here in listening to that. And there's another thing you can do. So if you stay inside the envelope, we've just killed about 95% of all the things that can kill you. We've just wiped out those possibilities. There's another thing, and I brief my first officers this same thing also, and my students. I'm just talking about anybody I fly with that, hey, I could choose to operate at one of 2 speeds. Okay, there are only 2 speeds. I'm a 2-speed operator. The first speed is slow, and if you've ever seen me speak, you've heard this 1,000 times, but it's worth repeating. What's the other speed? And because this is being recorded, I won't tell you what I normally say, but I'll just say screw up. So I can operate at one of 2 speeds. Slow or screw up. Choose one. A common denominator, a very common denominator in many of the accidents that I see is rushing to comply. Callie, you want the straight in or you want to take it downwind? Oh no, I got this. We'll take the straight in. It's going to save us 4 minutes. Whatever it is. Intersection departure. Why do an intersection departure? To save a minute? To save 2? Is it worth it? We'll talk about risk versus reward. Now there may be a lineup of aircraft and say, well, if I take an intersection, I can get off right now, otherwise I got to wait in that line of traffic. What's it really going to take? 10 minutes? Can you afford 10 minutes? Here's the thing, if you can't afford that 10 minutes, there's already something wrong. You haven't given yourself enough time. There's already an error in this whole operation. So slow down. And I tell my first officers, we are always compelled to rush, especially to comply with ATC. Take off without delay. No, I'll just wait. I'll just hold short. I'll wait. I don't need to rush. I got these 5 things I do on the runway, and I want to be able to do them without missing one. So I'll just hold short, let that guy land. We'll take off afterwards. You don't have to do what ATC tells you to. Okay, and now some more people came in. Did we get any controllers? No ATC controller? Good. Oh, no, sorry. Oh, that's right, you're retired. But you can vouch for this, right? Were you a pilot when you were controlling? Okay, so that's rare. So you were a private pilot when you were controlling. You knew what the pilots are doing. You're kind of familiar with the operation. Would you say most controllers are pilots? No, most are not pilots. They don't know what you have to do. They only know what they want you to do. So as a pilot in command, you've got to say, no, I got to slow down. Don't rush me. Or even if you're not ready to land, can you make short approach? Who hasn't gotten that? I had to retrain a guy as a fast team member, a fast representative, who made a gear up landing. And so when I first talked to him, I said, well, what happened? Why'd you make a gear up landing? Well, they asked me to make a short approach, so I was rushed. Well, you let them rush you. You rushed yourself. He reached over, and it was a Comanche 250, put the gear handle to neutral instead of down. He went for the switch. He put it down. He was rushed. He's looking at the runway, trying to make this short approach, and didn't look for the green lights. Forgot his gump check. So we did about 100 gump checks. The first one went like this. Okay, do a gump check. He says, okay. I said, what's the G? He says, gear. I'm like, you haven't been doing gump checks. So slow down. Don't let anybody rush you. Stick hard and fast to that. Stay inside the envelope. Don't let anybody rush you. If you take nothing else away from today and you do those 2 things, you're going to live a lot longer as a pilot. I see some FARs coming up here, and it's scaring me a little bit. I don't like reading these, and it's not death by PowerPoint. But it's very important to know that 91.7 says if your aircraft becomes unairworthy, you don't have to read it, but I'll tell you. If your aircraft becomes unairworthy at any point during the flight, the pilot in command will discontinue the flight. So what does it mean to be unairworthy? Say your airspeed indicator fails. Is it airworthy? No. We know there's a certain requirement of equipment that's required for daytime and nighttime. I can't tell you what they are, but I know where to find them in the regs. But there are certain things. I don't remember. I can't spell tomato or flames. I'll spell it wrong. So I don't do that. I just know where to find it. If anything becomes unairworthy, like let's say it is your airspeed indicator, and you got this little airport with a 1,500-foot strip right here, or you got your destination 30 miles away with a 6,000-foot strip, and those are the 2 airports that you have a choice to land at. What do? You're unairworthy. You have to discontinue the flight. Who says land at the short strip? It doesn't say immediately. It says discontinue, but you got to be a PIC here. It depends, and that's always the answer, especially if the FAA asks you a question. Well, it depends. On what? I don't know. I haven't figured it out yet, but it depends. But you're right. So I don't have an airspeed indicator. Do I want to land at a 1,500-foot strip or a 6,000-foot strip? I think anybody could justify a longer runway when you don't have an airspeed indicator, because we're probably going to fly faster than normal. Probably. Anyway. I don't know why I put that up there. So who's the pilot in command here? Okay, I think we can rule out the flight attendant. The passenger is probably pilot in command. The reason I put this up here is to utilize your resources again. He's using the autopilot. It's not cheating. It's okay to use the autopilot. Use it as the tool that it is. Just do not use it as a crutch. It's not a crutch. It's not something you can do to stop flying the airplane. If you have the autopilot on, can you log pilot in command? Yeah, because you're responsible, for the outcome of the flight, but you're not sole manipulator of the controls, right? Because you're sharing that with auto. So it's just an interesting. I got into this discussion with my dad. As far as logging actual instrument approaches, I said, "Do you log an instrument approach if it's down to minimums, but the autopilot flew the whole thing?" He won't log it. He says, "I didn't fly it. The autopilot did." I'm like, "Well, I'm serious. You write my dad. Tell him, hey, I think you should log those." He doesn't unless he's hand flying the airplane. Then he logs it because he flew it. I log it because, yes, the autopilot's flying, but I am never disengaged from the airplane. Even if the autopilot's flying, I'm watching what it's doing, and I am ready to click that button and take over at any time. do not be the person who engages the autopilot but disconnects the pilot. Okay? The autopilot engage switch is not a pilot disconnect switch. Disconnect. Use of safety belts. No pilot can operate the aircraft without telling the passengers or having them wear their seatbelts. I think we're all clear on that, right? So we got that. Other regulations. I told you I wouldn't have regulations. I lied. I just didn't want you leaving. Okay. But there are some regulations that apply to the first officer, to the pilot in command. I don't want to read all this, but you got to report. If you're an IFR and you have a malfunction, report it to ATC so they can appreciate and understand that you are somehow limited. They may not understand what it means, and so don't just say I've lost the Fetzer valve or something like that. They won't know what it means. Just say I've lost my ability to navigate because my global positioning system, GPS, has failed or whatever. So tell them what failed and how that impacts you. And it's, the pilot in command is responsible for having that happen. GPS. Has anybody seen those notices that come out that we're going to do military GPS jamming in this area that pretty much covers all the Western Hemisphere at my altitude? What do you do about that? I mean, what are really, I have an airplane that has GPS, no VOR, no ADF. Dead reckoning pilotage, that's all I've got left. Or VOR to VOR. This is a real thing. A friend of mine just flew an airplane from Dallas back to Los Angeles, and over most of Arizona and New Mexico there was no GPS. He had a Garmin 430, Garmin 530, a GNS something. He had a Era 660 he brought with him. He had 2 iPads and a cell phone. I think like 7 or 8 GPSs on the airplane. Not one way to navigate. So you lose that common thread, that GPS jamming goes out. Just something to think about because it has nothing to do with being pilot in command. I just thought of it and I thought to tell this story and share it, that if GPS is your only way to navigate, just be real careful and pay attention to those NOTAMs. So we talked about decisiveness. Someone said, well, again, a good pilot in command is decisive. Is it hard to land an airplane in the water? Should they call it landing in the water? A friend of mine brought that question up the other night. Maybe they should call it a watering, but then you might be doing something with your plants. Anyway, it's not difficult to ditch an aircraft in the water. It's really not. You've got this big open area. So I don't commend Sully for being able to ditch in the water. It's a even softer surface than the ground. There are some aspects of it that you need to be very careful about. But what I really commend Sully for is making a decision and sticking to it. Could he have made the runway? Yeah, he probably could have. Physically, it could have been done. But here's the key. Was he trained for it? No. And it's a small target. And if he missed that small target, it would have been catastrophic. This is a big target. This is something that we had never been trained for. He made a decision and stuck to it, and that's what I commend him for. As far as fuel, we started talking about the fuel thing. And anybody remember Avianca 52? You know the story? Well, watch this and we'll talk about it.
World News Sunday. Here's Forrest Sawyer. Good evening. We begin tonight in...
And the crash of the Avianca airliner, which killed 73 people on board. It seems unbelievable that it could have run out of fuel, but it did, and today we know why it did. Investigators have added up the figures of fuel on board and time in the air, and they spell disaster. Here's Robert Hager.
New calculations by investigators make it appear it was inevitable that the Avianca plane would run out of fuel. Papers found in the wreckage today confirm that the flight plan called for about 10,000 gallons of fuel to be loaded at takeoff in Colombia. 10,000 gallons is less than half of a 707's absolute capacity, but commonly airlines don't weigh down their planes with more than what's considered prudent for safe flight. In this case, about 3/4 of the 10,000 gallons would be needed for a direct flight to New York, leaving 2,500 gallons in reserve, enough to fly 90 minutes in case of delays. Investigators now say there were 3 delays due to bad weather. One over Norfolk, Virginia for 16 minutes, another over New Jersey for 27 minutes, and a final one over New Jersey for 46 minutes. Total delays, 89 minutes, using up almost all the 90 minutes worth of reserve fuel. But investigators also understand the Avianca pilots did tell air traffic controllers their reserve fuel was low 45 to 50 minutes before the crash. The National Transportation Safety Board's Lee Dickinson.
We want to find out which controller that was given that information, how that information was passed on from controller to controller, and that's the type of information we're looking for.
And there was mourning on this Sunday in the nearby village of Oyster Bay, a memorial mass at St. Dominic's Church. Prayers for the victims and prayers of thanks for those who survived the crash. Tonight, investigators say they feel one issue in the crash is communications, failure of the pilots to communicate the true urgency of their fuel situation, communicate that to controllers, but failure of controllers, too, to communicate with one another as the plane neared New York that this was a plane with a potential fuel problem. Garrick?
Well, Bob, if the controllers knew there was indeed a fuel problem, why didn't they bring that plane in earlier for a landing?
Well, Garrick, in bad weather, controllers get used to hearing a lot of complaints from pilots. The controllers are very busy to start with. Some pilots are not above a trick or two to express a mild concern about fuel in order to get out of a holding pattern and jump the line. So I think the feeling is if you want to get the controllers' attention well, you've got to do something like declare an emergency. That would do it.
Thanks, Bob Hager.
Okay, what jumps out at you? There's some seats up here if you guys want, anybody out in the sun wants to come in. We got seats up here if you want. So anyway, what jumps out at you? The controller didn't bring it in for a landing. He reported, he said on minimum fuel. So why didn't ATC bring him in for a landing? It's whose fault? Who thinks this is ATC's fault? And who thinks it's the pilot's fault? Okay, I think it's unanimous. The pilot should have declared emergency. He should have made it happen. The other night, I'm going into JFK, and I told someone this story. I'm going into JFK. This is no more than about 3 weeks ago. And the weather moves in prematurely. We had filed an alternate to Philadelphia. JFK has delays. We're holding. And I look at it and I see, okay, here's the process I go through. I tell my first officer, the burn from our holding pattern to the airport to JFK is X amount of fuel. We'll call it A. The burn from that airport to our alternate, so I'm going to shoot a missed approach flight on my alternate, is B. I got to have A plus B, right? Anything beyond that, I can hold with. So we had about 10 minutes, 15 minutes of holding fuel before we hit that A plus B, the burn to the airport plus the burn to my destination, plus what I want to land there with. So I'm really A plus B plus C, right? I want to land there with, say, 30 minutes, because that's my minimum. It's going to take another 30 minutes to get there, and we're 15 minutes out. That's an hour and 15 minutes of fuel that I have to have, and I will not hold and burn into that. Once I hit that exact point, no more holding, going somewhere. And so that's what happened. We hit that point, and we said we need to divert to Philadelphia. We're turning into Philadelphia. And ATC comes on and says, well, New York has just opened up. If you want to get into JFK, we can get you right in. Well, yeah, I got 200 people sitting behind me that would like me to make that decision. So at this point, yeah, I can make it to JFK. I have the burn to get there. I have the fuel to burn to get to my alternate with the fuel that I need, because I'm right at that number. Cruising on into JFK, they further say, well, New York's closed again. All right, we're going to go to Newark. We're right here next to New York. We're going to go on into Newark Airport. And we start into Newark, reprogramming our co-pilots like this. Programming the FMS. He's very busy changing our destination. And when we change an airline at the destination at the airline, it gets crazy, because we put it in the computer. We need to send it to the company, tell dispatch, so that when you're looking at FlightAware, here's the funny thing. And this is not a PIC moment. You can take a short nap if you don't want. Hear this. But as soon as we change the destination in our flight management system, all the passengers in back with their seat back monitors that have the map up see that we're now going to our... So as soon as we put that in there... Yeah, well, we're busy. Why are we going to Philadelphia? How do you know we're going to Philadelphia? Oh, yeah, it's on all the seat back monitors. All the passengers know right away. That's a distraction, actually, that I had to manage. So it's like, okay, we want to go change our destination. As soon as we put it in there, the passengers are going to know, and they're going to wonder, and all this stuff happens, and I'm going to be bothered. So we pulled the circuit breaker on the seat back monitors. I really did, because it's like, this is just too much right now. I don't know what's going to happen. And then they said, okay, halfway into Newark, New York's open again. JFK's open. When you want to get in, I'm like, oh, I could see it over there. I said, all right, I'll go there. But now I've got in my head, I'm not changing that plan anymore. So think about this Avianca. So we're heading into New York, and what happens? Oh, we're sorry, New York's closed again. You couldn't write this. I mean, you wouldn't make this up. You probably don't even believe me. But it did happen. They said, New York's closed. I said, no, it's not. They said, yeah, we need you to go back to Newark. I said, I'm not doing that. I'm declaring an emergency, and I'm flying direct to the fix just outside the outer marker, and I'll be landing at JFK. You do what you got to do. That's what we're doing. And we did. We landed with plenty of fuel. It was uneventful. The passengers were happy. I was happy. The funny thing is, nobody was landing at JFK. There was no traffic. I don't know what the issue was. To this day, I don't know. But I did what I had to do. Okay, I took control. You know, when they tell me how it's going to go, and I say, no, there's a time when a pilot in command just has to take control. And this Avianca clearly could have taken control earlier and not accepted that final delay. It's not good enough to just tell ATC that you're low on fuel. I think they're taking it more serious now and will get you in because pilots have been messing this up. You need to tell them, I have 8 minutes of fuel. Declare an emergency, I want to go in. Be very assertive about what you need. So someone said that assertive was a big thing, and it is. Did this go to sleep? Like half of you? Okay, we'll do this the old-fashioned way. There we go. So declaring an emergency, don't hesitate when you need to do that. Again, you can violate an FAR when you think you're operating under a circumstance that requires you to do so in the interest of safety. You don't have to declare it. But don't hesitate to declare it if you need it. When do you need it? When you're not getting something from air traffic control that you need to have, that's the time to declare it, and it really makes them aware, okay, of the seriousness of your situation. Don't hesitate. The AIM says that you should request assistance immediately when you need it, when you're having an emergency condition. And it also discusses that it can be an urgent, either distress situation or urgency condition. And it says that pilots do not hesitate to declare an emergency when they're faced with distress. I have an engine failure, fire in the cabin. Yeah, we don't hesitate to declare an emergency. But if it's leading to that, or if I'm just a little low on fuel, now we're hesitant. Pilots are very hesitant to do that. Or reluctant when they encounter situations that may not be immediately perilous but could be potentially dangerous. And the AIM further states, and this is good information, I highly suggest you read this chapter 6 on emergency and review it from time to time so you know exactly what it says. But the aircraft is in at least an urgency condition the moment the pilot becomes doubtful about the position, fuel endurance, weather, or any condition that could adversely affect the safety of flight. Declare an emergency. It doesn't hurt. There is no repercussion from it. Question?
Are afraid to declare because of consequences later.
And that's a very good point. People are afraid to declare because of consequences later. I've declared, I don't know how many emergencies, I'm going to guess or estimate somewhere between 8 to 20 emergencies I've declared, and I've not once ever had to do anything afterwards except live. So don't be, it's a very important point he brought up, that people are, pilots, and it says it in the AIM, are reluctant to declare an emergency. It's there for your use. It's there when you need it. If your flight is not routine and you're at all concerned, if your mouth starts getting dry because you're nervous of what the outcome is, or you're just starting to get tunnel vision, or you just don't know where you are, anything. There can be a number of things. You lose your GPS and they're jamming and you don't know where you are. Declare an emergency. Get the help you need. The bottom line is keeping it safe and getting what you need. There are not going to be repercussions except survival. Yeah.
So was there any fear of them saying, well, you had Philly, then you had Newark, and you turned those down, and now you're declaring an emergency, so in the end, gave up 2 options. So now it's going to look at the way airlines can look at.
So the question is, did I fear any repercussions of them scrutinizing what I did to pass up Philly, pass up Newark, declare an emergency, go to New York? I had absolutely no fear of that whatsoever. It was ATC changing the plan on me, not me changing the plan. I happily decided to do what I was asked as long as I could. As soon as we reached a situation where this is enough, I'm being asked too much. There was an accident in Houston of a Cirrus, of the poor gal that flew into Hobby and made 3 go-arounds. One was for ATC, the other 2 are because she couldn't make the descent, whatever, and they changed the plan on her several times. And it's tough for a private pilot to battle with ATC, especially at a big Class Bravo airport. But the idea is, okay, enough is enough. I'm going to fly a downwind, a base, and a final for this runway and put it on the ground. Remember, you're the pilot in command. You are in charge of, I can't emphasize enough those words that you know but may not appreciate, that you are the final responsibility, the ultimate, as to the safety and operation of that airplane, and you have to take that. You really do. Yeah. And there's the NASA. So he says there's the NASA. The NASA forms are great. If you violate a reg, you file a NASA. If I violated a reg because I had to declare an emergency, I've had a medical emergency where someone's having a heart attack and back, and I'll exceed the 250 knots below 10,000 feet to try and get them on the ground as soon as I can. Will I file a NASA report for that? No, I exercise my pilot authority. I really didn't violate because I'm operating under 91.3. You certainly can file it, and it can't hurt at all. And I do recommend it. At any time that you think you've done something, and that was a willful. I don't know that it would even be accepted into the NASA, because when you do it on purpose, they don't accept it. But in an emergency, you can do that. I've never been scrutinized or blamed for having an emergency. If you talk to any FAA inspector, do we have anybody from the FAA here yet? Usually they come chasing after me. So if you ask any of them, they will say, no, you declare an emergency, they're not going to scrutinize. If you declare an emergency to try to get ahead or cut in line like that reporter referred to, then yeah, maybe. But if you're in a situation where you truly need some help and you declare an emergency, I don't think anybody's going to scrutinize that. And there's a term in there, request assistance immediately, and the time to do that is as soon as you recognize that something is wrong. And safety, again, is, I can't emphasize this enough. It says it in the AIM that safety is not a luxury. Take action. Be very proactive about getting what you need or doing what you need to do. So a good pilot in command also manages the risk, and the Kings put this great yesterday. I really actually like the way they said it. Safety is not necessarily the word of the day. It's managing risk or risk mitigation, risk management. So a good pilot in command will manage that risk. So I have a question. It's on the screen. What's more dangerous? Flying, who said that? Flying an airplane? The way you fly it? Who said it? Yeah? What's that? I'm sorry. For general aircraft? GA? GA is safer or more dangerous? Okay. Answer?
I think it's a trick question.
That is. It is a trick question because the answer is then what?
Any of them can be dangerous depending on how you drive a car, ride an airplane, or fly an airplane, or ride a bike.
Absolutely. So it's not the act of doing something that makes it dangerous. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, you're right. It is a trick question. So the answer is it depends. Okay? Right? It's how you're operating it, and that's a very good point and a very good observation. It's the act of doing this thing is not what's dangerous. It can be risky, it can involve hazards, but you mitigate that and you make it safe. So flying an airplane can be dangerous, just as riding a bike is. I would never do that. So risk versus reward, and Bob Hoover, I love the way he put it. Oh, that's not time to play that yet. Getting out of bed involves risk, right? I know it does for me because I'll normally trip over something. Doesn't mean I'm going to stay in bed. So we do things that involve risk, we need to mitigate it. So the night before, I might make sure the path is clear. If I know I'm prone to tripping over something getting out of bed, I'm going to mitigate that by making sure everything's out of the way when I go to bed. So we do accept a certain amount of risk. Anybody fly to an airport that's kind of dangerous? It's a little risky because there's just nowhere to go after takeoff. for a few seconds, for 30 seconds, a minute maybe, there's some risk there. So we can mitigate that by maybe having a plan, or we have to decide it's worth it. So there's a risk versus reward.
And there's something about risk-taking that you don't think anything's going to ever happen to you. It just only happens to other people. You like to think that I'm smarter than the airplane is, and I'll know how to handle whatever situation comes my way. That isn't always the case. If you have a malfunction at the wrong place at the wrong time, you're dead.
And so that was very succinctly put, that sometimes stuff happens, right? If the wrong thing happens at the wrong time. So we do accept a certain amount of risk at some airports where if you lose your engine, it doesn't necessarily mean you're dead, but if you fly an airplane into the ground at slow an airspeed with your wings level, under control, you're likely to survive that. But do what you can to mitigate that risk. So as far as risk versus reward, has anybody ever heard of the plank exercise? Oh good, this is fun. So if I were to give you, what's your name again? You, Diamond Aircraft. Okay, Diamond. If I were to give you $20 and I lay this 2x12 on the ground right here across the ground in front of the stage, and I gave you $20 to walk across that plank, would you do it? Yeah, I would too. Yeah, $20, walk across the plank, sure. Okay, now let's set up 2 chairs. Okay, we're going to put that plank across the 2 chairs. So maybe $30. So the risk goes up, the reward has to be better, right? To increase our risk. But maybe you do that. How about remember the the World Trade Center's towers? Bless their hearts. Let's say I stretch that same plank between the World Trade Center towers up on top. So you're up like 100 and something, and I'm going to give you $20 for that. Would you do it? So there's more risk there. I mean, you're just walking across a plank. There's nothing different about doing it up there. I mean, do you think if you did it here that you'd fall off? If you just walked across? Probably not. But if you did, the hazards aren't as, the risk isn't as big. You're not going to kill yourself if you fall on this nice plush carpet. Up there between the 2 towers, you walk across that plank is, I think, arguably more risky, right? But let's say that I offered you $200. Would anybody do that for $200? Okay, what if the building you're standing on is on fire and the other one isn't? Okay, so there's a reward there, right? That you get to live if you do it. If you don't, you die. So now, risk versus reward. If you're going to take a risk, make sure the reward is worth it. That's only the point that I'm trying to make. Trust versus complacency. Most pilots don't perceive reality. You suffer from a normative philosophy where you anticipate the way things are going to go. You see it that way. And you tend to try to fly the airplane and operate that way based on the outcome that you perceive. And so you just trust that everything's going to work, that the wing will remain attached, the fuel tank won't leak, nothing's going to go wrong. Don't let that kind of trust erode into complacency. So you want to always ask yourself, what if this? What am I going to do? And kind of decide, have a backup plan. Don't have a hope and a prayer that things are going to work out, or that tire that looks worn out, it made it on the last landing. That doesn't mean it's going to work out on this landing. So you don't want to just have faith in what has already happened and has been working, or have some kind of creeping normalcy for yourself. Like this flashlight, it's been working great. I'm going to keep using it without replacing the batteries. Well, when it fails? It's when you're using it. So there's all kinds of things about that. Don't be blissfully ignorant, and don't feel invincible because you're not. So being a little bit scared of flying is okay. A little bit scared. A little bit of fear makes you think, okay, this could happen, so I'm going to come up with a way to solve that issue. And I've got so much more, but I know that I want to watch our time here. What I want to do is just ask any questions that you have, or any comments on something I've said, or concerns, or something that you'd like me to elaborate on. Well, thank you very much for coming. Think about the words I've said. Stay in the envelope and never rush to comply. Remember, 2 speeds, slow and screw up. I got my website, my email. Feel free to contact me if you'd like.